My name is Eleanor Grace Whitmore, and I'm 68 years old. For nearly 50 years, I was a wife, a mother, and the quiet force behind Hazelbrook Orchards, a small organic apple farm nestled in the rolling hills of Pennsylvania. My hands, though stiff from arthritis, still recall the feeling of turning dough into sourdough loaves and pruning trees alongside Richard, my husband, at the crack of dawn. But just 3 weeks ago, I buried him. Richard and I had been married since 1981. Together, we built everything: the orchard, the house, the family. But when he passed away from pancreatic cancer after 14 grueling months of watching a strong man wither away, I was left with an unexpected truth. I realized that maybe, just maybe, I hadn't built what I thought I had. Or perhaps it wasn't enough to hold on to my children. Our children, Darren and Samantha, had already distanced themselves from us long before Richard's diagnosis. Darren, the eldest, had carved out a fast-paced career in Boston's financial world. He hadn't been home in over a decade, except for a few weekends. Samantha, on the other hand, flitted from one failed wellness business to the next, always funded by Richard's savings, always needing just one more loan. I had hoped that, in the wake of Richard's death, they would return to the family roots. I dreamed that they would remember the orchard, the family dinners, the love that built our home. But when they came for the funeral, what I saw wasn't children mourning their father. I saw professionals calculating an estate. The night after the funeral, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the worn wood of our dining table. I had suggested we sort through Richard's things together the next day. It was a small gesture, a mother's way of preserving memory. But they had other plans. The next morning, sunlight poured through the lace curtains that Richard and I had chosen together 30 years ago. I brewed coffee, the simple kind Richard liked, not the fancy imported blend Darren had brought from Boston, and waited at the kitchen table. When Darren and Samantha came downstairs, they were sharply dressed. Darren wore a blazer, Samantha a silk blouse, and perfectly curled hair. They looked like they were heading to a business meeting, not gathering to remember their father. "Mom," Darren said, placing his coffee mug down with the same practiced precision I'd seen in Richard. "We've been talking." Samantha glanced at him, then at me. "We think it's time to start settling things. The estate, the business, the house." I blinked, unsure if I'd heard him correctly. "Settling? It's practical," Darren continued. "You can't run the orchard alone and manage the house. It's too much for someone your age." My age. The words hung in the air, heavy, as though they had crushed something inside of me. I had pruned those trees with Richard through blizzards and heat waves. I'd handled payroll when we couldn't afford an assistant. I'd baked pies for fundraisers, driven tractors, delivered crates to food banks. "We want you to be comfortable," Samantha added, her voice smooth, almost rehearsed. "There's a lovely retirement community 2 hours south, Sunnyvale Estates. Activities, friends your age." I stood up, clearing the breakfast plates, needing to move to hide my trembling hands. But then Darren pulled out a folder, his voice suddenly colder. "Dad spoke to me about this last year," he said, sliding a set of papers toward me. He wanted Melissa and me to take over. I looked at the papers. They were printed on Darren's corporate letterhead, and Richard's signature was there. But it was too perfect, too steady. Richard hadn't written that clearly in months, not since the morphine. "This isn't from our family lawyer," I said, my voice tight. "He was lucid when he signed it," Darren insisted. Samantha quickly added, "A fresh start. There's a developer interested. $7 million for the land. We'd be set. You'd be cared for." A developer. They were talking about selling the orchard, leveling it, replacing a lifetime of harvests and sustainability with concrete and cul-de-sacs. "You're talking about selling your father's life's work," I said quietly, feeling the weight of the words settle in my chest. "Mom, be reasonable," Darren said. "The orchard can't last forever." That's when something inside of me snapped. A slow burn of fury I hadn't felt in years, not since I chased off a fox from the chicken coop. I looked at both of them, my children, and said calmly, "Show me the will." Darren hesitated, but pushed it forward again. I didn't touch it. "I'm going to bed," I said, turning away. "We'll talk tomorrow." But deep down, I already knew. There would be no tomorrow conversation. They weren't grieving. They were executing a plan. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake in the bed Richard and I had shared for decades, listening to the creaks of the farmhouse walls and the wind brushing against the apple trees outside. Every sound was familiar. The silence in my children's hearts, though, was something new. It felt foreign. By morning, the sharp, bitter scent of Darren's imported coffee filled the house, not the warm, nostalgic aroma of the coffee Richard and I had shared. My joints ached more from betrayal than age. When I went downstairs, Darren and Samantha were already waiting, coats on, suitcases packed. "We packed some essentials for you," Samantha said, her voice too bright. "We thought we could drive you to Sunnyvale today, just to look. You don't have to decide yet." "I'm not going to a retirement community," I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee. Darren checked his watch, impatience creeping into his voice. "Mom, be reasonable. The paperwork is done. We close with the developers next week. You can't stay here." "I've lived here my entire adult life," I said, my voice calm. "This is my home." But Darren was unmoved. "It's all of ours," he said flatly. "Dad left the business to us. It's time you let go." I stared at him, and for the first time, I didn't see the boy who once followed Richard through the orchards, asking questions about bees and frost. I saw a stranger, someone who viewed me as a liability to be managed. "I need my medication," I said, stepping away. "And I'd like to grab some family photos." Samantha nodded, visibly relieved. "Take whatever personal items you want. We'll ship the rest." Upstairs, I didn't cry. I gathered my medication, but I also took something they didn't know existed. Behind a panel in the medicine cabinet, I retrieved my passport and birth certificate. In the closet, I reached behind Richard's old flannel shirts and pulled out a small fireproof box. It was heavy, and when I opened it, I knew I held something far more powerful than sentiment. The original deed to 20 acres of land, purchased in my maiden name before Richard and I married. Land with water rights, essential for any future development. When I went back downstairs, my purse felt heavier, but my heart was lighter. "Ready?" Darren asked. "Sure," I said, allowing Samantha to take my arm. I let them believe I was defeated. We drove past the fields just beginning to bloom, past the school where I had volunteered, past the library where I had read to children. But instead of taking the highway toward Sunnyvale, Darren veered onto a remote county road. 20 minutes later, he pulled over by an empty field. "This is where you get off, Mom," he said, as casually as if he were announcing a stoplight. "The house and business are ours now." Samantha's smile faltered. "Darren, what?" "She'll contest the will, make scenes. This is cleaner. She has clothes, her meds. There's a gas station 5 miles up." He opened my door. Just like that, they left me standing on the side of the road with nothing. Or so they thought. The car disappeared down the road, leaving a cloud of dust and the bitter sting of betrayal. I stood there, the wind tugging at my coat. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't broken. I was free. I clutched the small suitcase they had packed for me and began to walk, not toward the gas station, but toward town. My flats weren't made for gravel roads, and the early spring sun was already warming the back of my neck. But with every step, my purpose grew stronger. In my purse was everything I needed: my ID, my passport, my medication, and most importantly, the original deed to the 20 acres of prime orchard land. Land that Darren and Samantha didn't know existed. Land that I had bought in my name alone before Richard and I had ever married. It was my lifeline, and my children had forgotten something. They didn't understand the soil beneath their feet. They didn't understand the weight of legacy. But I did. After nearly 2 hours of walking, my feet were blistered. But I reached the edge of Hazelbrook. The familiar sight of Miller's Gas and Grocery came into view. I sat on the bench outside, watching the cars come and go. I didn't look like much, just a tired old woman with a suitcase. But I had something far more powerful than they ever would: the truth. Ray Miller, who had known me for over 30 years, stepped out from behind the counter, wiping his hands on his apron. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, concern etched on his face. "You okay? You look a little pale." "Just resting, Ray," I said. "Been a long day." He eyed my suitcase. "Real sorry about Richard. He was a good man." "Yes," I nodded. "Yes, he was." He paused before asking gently, "You need to use the phone? If it's not too much trouble." I followed him inside, to the small office in the back. There, I dialed the number from memory. Our family lawyer, Harold Jennings. "Naomi," he answered, surprised. "I've been trying to reach you. I expected you at the will reading." I gripped the receiver tighter, What reading? There was a pause. Darren presented a will. I had concerns. It didn't match the file your husband and I updated last year. I swallowed hard. I need your help, I said, and your discretion. You have both. Meet me at my office, 1 hour. I hung up and turned to Ray. Do you sell prepaid phones? He nodded. A few? Want one? Yes, and a bottle of water. He wouldn't take my money. It's on the house, Mrs. Whitmore. You need anything else? I gave him a faint smile, grateful for the kindness. But I didn't cry when I buried Richard, and I wouldn't cry now. I had work to do. The next move was already in motion. Harold Jennings's office was on the second floor of a weathered Victorian house, across from the library in the heart of Hazelbrook. He'd been our family lawyer for over 30 years. Harold was one of those men who still believed in the power of handshakes, wearing sweater vests without irony, and making sure his clients always felt heard. Helen, his secretary, greeted me at the door with a gasp. Mrs. Whitmore, she said, her eyes wide with surprise. Mr. Jennings is expecting you. Would you like some water? Coffee? No, thank you, I replied quietly, my voice steady. Harold met me in the waiting room, his appearance almost unchanged. A little more stooped, perhaps, but his eyes remained sharp, like a hawk's, always watching, always thinking. Naomi, he said, not directing me to the desk, but to a pair of comfortable leather chairs by the window. He sat across from me, his expression serious. Tell me everything, he said. So I did. I told him about the funeral, the fake will, the business-like discussion in our kitchen, the drive, the roadside abandonment. I didn't leave anything out. The betrayal, the coldness, the realization that my children were not grieving their father. They were executing a plan. Harold listened, his face darkening with every word. He didn't interrupt. He simply absorbed everything, his brow furrowed in thought. When I finished, I reached into my purse and pulled out the fireproof box. It was small and heavy. With reverence, I placed it on the table between us and opened it. Inside was the original deed to 20 acres of land. The land Richard and I had quietly set aside decades ago, in my name, before we were married. Harold studied the document for a long moment in silence. Then he spoke, his voice low and filled with awe. This is gold, Naomi, he said, almost reverently. This isn't just land, this is leverage. With the water rights and the zoning, the developer can't touch anything without this. I know, I said softly, my gaze steady. He leaned back in his chair, tapping the edge of the deed thoughtfully. The will's a forgery, he said. I had my suspicions when I saw the signature. It was too clean, too smooth, for a man under hospice care. I knew it wasn't Richard's handwriting. Harold paused for a moment, thinking it over. We'll challenge it, he said, but that takes time. In the meantime, we use this. He held up the deed. You still have legal ownership of the most critical piece of the land. They can't move forward with the sale without your consent. I want my home back, I said quietly, and I want them to understand what they've done. Harold nodded slowly. Then we'll make them understand. He stood up, his movements swift and purposeful. First thing tomorrow, I'll draft a letter to the developer. They need to be made aware that the property is not what they were promised. I sat there for a moment, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. Will they back out? I asked. If they're smart, they will, Harold said. Developers don't like lawsuits, and they certainly don't like incomplete land rights. He paused, a flicker of something dangerous in his eyes. I also know a judge in district court. We can file a motion to freeze the sale until the matter is resolved. My heart skipped a beat. There was a spark of hope, a tiny flicker of light in this nightmare. I don't want revenge, Harold, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I just want truth and peace. Harold nodded. You'll have both, he promised, his eyes filled with determination. Starting now. By noon the next day, Harold had filed an emergency injunction to freeze any transfer of ownership related to Hazelbrook Orchards. A courier delivered the legal notice to the development firm Darren and Samantha had been dealing with. Within hours, the deal was suspended. The developer, faced with unexpected legal complications and the revelation that a key portion of the land, the only natural water source, was owned separately and undisclosed, began to backpedal. Their lawyers reached out to Harold with urgent requests for clarification. I told them the truth, Harold said as we sat in his office reviewing documents. The land is incomplete. The water rights are not transferable. And more importantly, your children don't have the authority they claim. That evening, I received a text from Samantha. It was the first time she'd contacted me since they left me by the roadside. "Mom, please call me. We need to talk. Darren's freaking out. We didn't know about that other land. Can we just fix this?" I stared at the words on my prepaid phone, the screen blinking in the low light. No apology, no recognition of what they had done. Just panic now that the money was slipping through their fingers. I didn't reply. Later that night, Darren called Harold directly, demanding explanations, trying to reassert control, but Harold calmly informed him that all matters would now be handled through legal channels. "They're realizing they miscalculated badly," Harold said. "They thought you had nothing left." I smiled faintly, a sense of calm settling over me. "But I had everything they forgot to value." Harold looked at me with quiet pride. "You're handling this with grace, Naomi. A lot of people would have gone straight to scorched earth." I looked out the window, watching the town of Hazelbrook go about its business. The children riding bikes, the dog barking in the distance, someone mowing their lawn. Life was still simple here, still honest. "I've lived too long with kindness in my bones to become bitter now," I said, my voice steady. "But I won't be silent either. The orchard would not be sold. Not now. Not like this. The orchard Richard built, the legacy he left, was not a commodity. It was home, and I wasn't done protecting it." In the weeks that followed, I didn't return to the old farmhouse. Instead, I rented a modest apartment above the bakery on Hazelbrook's Main Street. The space was small, but it had a cozy balcony just big enough for a rocking chair and a few potted herbs. The air always smelled like cinnamon and fresh bread in the mornings. It wasn't the home Richard and I built, but it was mine, and that mattered. I started teaching again, quilting on Wednesday nights at the community center, just like before. I even began holding weekend workshops at the library, sharing everything I knew about organic gardening and sustainable fruit farming. Teenagers came, retirees came, even young couples hoping to start their own farms. They listened not because I raised my voice, but because I spoke with history in my hands. I spoke about the land we had protected for decades. And the most important lesson I shared with them: that land wasn't just soil and trees. It was about roots, about legacy. And that legacy wasn't something to be sold or discarded. It was something to be cared for, to be nurtured, to be passed on. The land Richard and I had worked so hard to protect now had new guardians. I donated the water rights in a trust to the Hazelbrook Agricultural Cooperative, a local initiative dedicated to supporting young farmers. They would use it, not sell it. They would care for the trees like Richard had. That was the future I wanted. One where the land wasn't just seen as a commodity, but as a way to grow, not just food, but community. Darren and Samantha kept their distance. I didn't hear much from them, and honestly, I wasn't looking for anything from them either. But I did hear whispers. Whispers that the developer had pulled out completely, that the fake will had been formally challenged and frozen, that their reputations had taken a hit in their respective cities. But I didn't gloat. I didn't need revenge. What I needed was peace. What I wanted was truth. The orchard remained untouched, blooming in the spring as it always had. And every time I passed it on my walks, I smiled. Not with bitterness, but with the quiet strength of a woman who had reclaimed not just her land, but her voice. I remember that moment on the gravel road, standing alone with a suitcase I didn't pack, watching my own children drive away without so much as a second glance. It should have broken me, but it didn't, because in that silence, I finally heard the truth I had ignored for years. Love is not loyalty without question, and being a mother does not mean tolerating betrayal. Just because you raise the ones who betray you doesn't mean you have to let them. Darren and Samantha believed they could erase me. They thought that because I was older, grieving, and alone, I would have no choice but to hand over everything, that I would simply fade away. But they forgot something. Before I was a wife, a mother, a widow, I was Eleanor Grace, a woman who built something with her hands, her heart, and her mind. And I had never needed to scream to be strong. What they saw as weakness, my silence, my trust, my love, was actually the very power that protected me. As I sit here now, looking back on all that's happened, I know that I've learned a valuable lesson. There's strength in knowing who you are, in knowing what you stand for. There's power in being calm, in taking your time, in trusting that everything you need is already within you. When people try to take what you've built, don't fight with noise, don't fight with anger, fight with clarity, fight with purpose. And when they leave you with nothing, don't forget that your worth is never tied to what others take from you. It's in who you've always been. If you're listening to this and you've ever been cast aside, underestimated, or treated like a footnote in your own life, I want you to hear this. Your strength isn't in how loud you fight. It's in how well you know what you stand for. And when you stand your ground, even quietly, it echoes louder than any betrayal. My orchard still stands. My name is still on the deed. And my life, well, it's mine again. So to anyone who's ever been told, this is where you get off, where I say, walk if you must, but don't leave your worth behind. Walk with purpose. Walk with quiet power. And when you're ready, tell your story. It might just save someone else. The weeks that followed brought a sense of peace I hadn't anticipated. I rented a small apartment above Miller's Bakery on Main Street, where the scent of fresh bread and cinnamon filled the air every morning. It wasn't much. A modest space with a small balcony for my rocking chair and potted herbs. It was different from the farmhouse Richard and I had built, but it was mine, and that was all I needed. I didn't retreat into isolation as some might have expected. Instead, I returned to the heart of this small town, to the community I'd always known. I began quilting again on Wednesday nights at the community center, the same way I had for years before. I hosted weekend workshops at the library, teaching young couples, teenagers, and retirees about organic gardening and sustainable farming. Sharing the lessons Richard and I had learned, the legacy we'd built. People came to listen, not because of my voice, but because of what I represented. I spoke with history in my hands, the land we had nurtured, the family dinners we had shared, the values of sustainability and respect for the earth. It was these values I hoped would continue to grow, far beyond the borders of Hazelbrook orchards. Through it all, I kept my focus on the future, not on the past. I donated the water rights of the orchard to the Hazelbrook Agricultural Cooperative, an initiative supporting young farmers in the area. I knew the land needed to be preserved, cared for, and passed on. This was the future I wanted for it, not one where it was sold off to developers, but one where it continued to serve the people who cared for it, just as Richard and I had done. I never heard much from Darren and Samantha after that day. It was as if they had evaporated into the distance, as if they had already moved on with their lives and their own plans. But I did hear things, whispers, gossip. People talked about how the developer had pulled out of the deal, how the fake will had been challenged and frozen, and how Darren and Samantha's reputations had taken a hit in their respective cities. But I didn't rejoice in that. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to make them suffer. What mattered to me was that the orchard remained untouched. It was still here, blooming as it had every spring for decades. That was enough for me. When I passed the orchard now, I smiled, not with bitterness, but with the quiet strength of a woman who had reclaimed what was hers. What I had built, what I had fought for. The orchard still stood, its roots grounded in more than just soil. It was grounded in love, in legacy, and in truth. Looking back on everything, I've realized that there's a power in silence, in stillness, in choosing not to fight with anger or bitterness, but with purpose. There is strength in knowing who you are, what you stand for, and trusting that you have the tools you need to overcome whatever comes your way. My children thought they could erase me. They thought I was too old, too grieving, too frail to stand up for myself. They didn't understand that I wasn't just a mother or a widow. I was Eleanor Grace Whitmore, a woman who had built something from nothing, with her hands, her heart, and her mind. And no matter how hard they tried, they could never take that away from me. They thought that because I had been quiet, because I hadn't fought back in a way they could recognize, they could simply push me aside. But they didn't understand the power in my silence. My quiet strength was what protected me. If you've ever been underestimated, made to feel like you don't have the strength to fight back, I want you to hear this. Your power is not in how loud you scream. It's in knowing what you stand for, and in standing your ground. Even if that ground is quiet, even if no one is watching, the truth, the legacy, and the strength you have can never be taken from you. Not by betrayal, not by greed, not by anyone. The orchard stands, the land is mine, my life is mine, and that in the end is all that matters. To anyone who's ever been told to step aside, to give up, or to be quiet, I say, don't. Stand firm in who you are. Walk with purpose, walk with quiet power, and when you're ready, tell your story, because your story matters. And it might just be the one that changes everything for someone else. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my story. If you found something in it that resonated with you, please like, share, and leave a comment below. If you've ever been underestimated, or if you've ever found your strength when others